Hey everyone, welcome to the C&J Art, Adventure and Family channel. So in this video I show you our Memorial Day here in Argentina, which falls on March 24th, the exact same day as it falls in the United States. And that is purely coincidence, which I will hopefully explain as this video goes on. So last Monday, Memorial Day here in Argentina, or El Día de la Memoria por la Justicia y la Verdad, my husband and I went down to Plaza de Mayo, where every year all the unions and many of the political parties gather to keep alive in the memory of the people here in Argentina that on this day in 1976, a military junta forcibly took power. And during that time, they were in power from 1976 to 1983. More than 30,000 Argentinians were disappeared. And they would have claimed, and some still do claim, that the ones who were disappeared, or rather murdered by their own government, were terrorists. Keep in mind, many of these people did not have due process, and so we don't know. Many others will claim, especially the mothers and grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, will claim that they were innocent people who just happened to know the wrong person or say the wrong thing or whatever. They went to the wrong meeting in their school or university and were rounded up and disappeared by the government. So this is a big debate that is going on right now in Argentina, and with very high stakes, I would think, because the question is why the current government is pushing the idea that everyone during that time who was rounded up and murdered by their own government were terrorists, and why do other people claim otherwise? And maybe to understand that, I have to go further back into time, before the 1970s, when in the 1950s President Juan Domingo Perón was deposed by a military dictatorship who then went on to try to roll back many of the gains the working classes had achieved during his presidency. And in response to that, some Peronists became very extremist, very violent, and started targeting the ruling classes. And so in response to that, the ruling classes here and many outside forces, corporations, the United States, began to quietly support the military in order to try to suppress the more extremist leftist groups. And so by the time Juan Domingo Perón came back into power in the 1970s, he had a right-hand man named José López Rega, who began a secret death squad called the AAA, who would round up people in the opposition to them and quietly disappear them. And so in response to that, the ruling classes here and outside forces stepped up their support of the different militaries here in Argentina, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, and encouraged them, let's say, to overthrow his wife, who then became president after his death. So from 1974 to 1976, she was president. And so when the military junta, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, took power, they continued to target the more militant members of the left. But they also disappeared a lot of innocent people. So anyone who they deemed might pose any kind of threat and fell under their suspicion were taken and disappeared. And so they rounded up students, high school students, university students, union members, union leaders, artists, writers. So they targeted anyone who they suspected might have very strong leftist leanings. And so what they would do is they would round up these people, torture them, and then once a week they would do these death flights where they would take the people who they had decided would die that week, drug them, and then drop them into the ocean. And like I said, some of these people might have actually been part of these extremist leftist groups, but most of them most probably were innocent people who were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. So in 1985, the mothers and grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo began to congregate around this state in order to put pressure on the new democratically elected government in order to see that justice was served, because at that time the military leaders of the junta were on trial and there was not a lot of faith that they would actually receive due justice. And so they marched on Plaza de Mayo to put pressure on the government. And so this date, March 24th, became Memorial Day, or El Día de la Memoria por la Justicia y la Verdad. And so now, in the present day, we have a government that is pushing the idea that the military dictatorship was simply defending Argentina against its enemies, its internal enemies, who were all terrorists. Like every person who was rounded up and disappeared were all terrorists. And if you consider that many members of the left, of the Peronist Party and the Communist Party and so on, did try to fight for their rights through very violent means, then they do have a point. The left did use violence against the government and against the ruling classes. But most people here would agree that a lot of the people who were rounded up and disappeared during that time were simply innocent people who were at the wrong place at the wrong time. We don't know how much, without due process, there's no way to know. But the very fact that the government right now is pushing one narrative and trying to bury another part of that narrative is very troubling to many people at this time. Because if you know Argentina at all, you know how unpredictable this country is. It always feels like it's on the edge of something big. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I think that many more people came to this march than the previous ones that I've been to, because they wanted to remind the government that they will not be silenced, that they will not be intimidated into staying home and not speaking up, because I think they fear that the government is pushing a certain narrative, because some parts of the powers that be right now in Argentina would not mind going back to that time and simply disappearing people they find troubling. One member of the current administration here in Argentina went on TV to defend the police's use of force against protesters. They actually shot into an unarmed crowd and injured many people there. And she was saying, well, you have to break some eggs in order to make an omelet. And of course, many people found that disturbing, because she was basically justifying the use of state violence against unarmed protesters, which everyone here in this country has the right to do. Everyone has the right to protest. Of course, on the other side, people who are more conservative leaning might say, well, you have to use whatever means necessary to impose law and order. But the thing is, policemen using force against unarmed protesters, for most people is simply a little too much. Like, maybe arrest people and so forth, but don't try to kill them, And of course, the conservatives will say, well, they started it, they threw rocks or whatever. A rock against a gun, really? But, that's how the argument is going here. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's all a little bit scary, a little bit extraordinary in a way. I'm used to the US where things like this just don't happen, or at least I don't think they happen. But, I'm in South America. All the countries in South America have all experienced bloody dictatorships and civil wars and so forth, and it's just a feeling of unpredictability here. So we'll see. Anyway, that is my condensed history of El Día de la Memoria por la Justicia y la Verdad from an outsider's perspective. Obviously I was not born here. I have slowly been learning as much as I can about the history of this country, my adopted country, my husband's country, and I still have a lot to learn, but that's as far as I know, or at least a summary of as much as I know. In other words, that is it for me talking. I am just going to let the video play out and let the images speak for themselves. My husband and I think we went along the entire parade route, so we basically saw everything, I think. But if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already. There is also a Buy Me a Coffee link down below, and hope to see you next time. Ciao!
No.
Why?
Because that's going to be the pinnacle of it. That's when all the people are going to march there, and there's still a lot more of space
Yeah.
to